They called themselves the Blood Phoenix MC, the most feared biker gang in all of Montana. For months, they ruled the streets of Thunder Ridge like they owned them, spreading fear and chaos without consequence. But then, they crossed the wrong man. To them, Frank Anderson was nothing more than a 72-year-old shopkeeper, slow, quiet, and easy to intimidate. But when they torched the American flag outside his hardware store, they made a mistake they'd never forget. What their ruthless leader, Jake Marshall, didn't realize was that Frank wasn't just some old man. He was a decorated Vietnam War hero. And with one phone call, he summoned something more powerful than revenge, a brotherhood of over 200 combat veterans who owed him their lives. Within 24 hours, the streets of Thunder Ridge were no longer just streets, they were about to become a battlefield. What began as an act of disrespect would ignite a story of redemption the gang never saw coming. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if stories like this grab you, hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow's story? It's going to hit even harder. Now back to Thunder Ridge. The morning sun stretched across Main Street as Frank Anderson moved with slow, deliberate care. For 40 years, he had raised the American flag outside Anderson's hardware every morning at sunrise. His steps were slower now, but his purpose never faded. The flag was worn, its edges frayed by time, but to Frank, it was sacred. A symbol of sacrifice. Of battles fought far from home. Across the street, Mary Ellen Foster watched from her diner, wiping spotless counters out of habit. She'd seen Frank perform this quiet ritual every day for 2 decades. "Coffee's getting cold, Frank," she called out with a smile. Frank looked over, a soft grin tugging at his withered face. "Some things gotta be done right, Mary Ellen." Inside the diner, Patricia Gardner sipped lukewarm coffee, her eyes fixed on a pack of motorcycles rolling down the street. The engine snarled as they passed the hardware store, their jackets branded with a rising phoenix surrounded by flames, a symbol meant to intimidate, not inspire. "That's the 4th time this week," Pat muttered as Frank walked in. "They're getting bolder." Frank eased onto his usual stool at the counter, his movements as steady as when he raised the flag. "Folks who need to show power usually don't have much of it," he said calmly. Mary Ellen placed a fresh cup in front of him, but her hands trembled. "They were here yesterday, Frank. 6 of them. Intimidating my customers. Acting like they run the town." Frank's eyes narrowed, just slightly. "Did they cause any trouble?" "Not directly," she admitted. "But Jake, their leader, made it clear they expect special treatment from now on. Free meals. No questions. Said it was for protection." The bell above the door jingled as Police Chief Rick Sawyer entered, his uniform sharp despite the early hour. "Morning, Frank." "Mary Ellen." "Pat." He nodded to each, taking a seat beside Frank. "I assume you've heard about the Jenkins garage?" Frank wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. "Tom mentioned it yesterday." "Vandalism?" "More like destruction," Rick muttered, accepting his own cup. "They smashed every window. Left a phoenix feather behind. Their signature. 3rd business this month," Pat added. "Pharmacy, gas station, now Jenkins." Rick's jaw clenched. "They're careful. Never enough proof to charge anyone. And people are too scared to speak out." Frank stared into his coffee, his voice quiet. "Fear's a strange thing, Rick. Makes people forget who they really are. What they're capable of." Rick looked over. "You speaking from experience?" Frank didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted far beyond the walls of the diner. "Back in '68, I had a young lieutenant under my command. Scared of his own shadow. Then one night we got pinned down by the VC. Worst firefight I'd ever seen. That lieutenant, something changed in him that night. He found a strength bigger than fear." "What happened to him?" Mary Ellen asked gently. Frank's lips curved into a small smile. "Last I heard, he was running a special forces training facility. Fear didn't define him. How he faced it did. Just then, the low growl of motorcycles returned. Through the diner window, they saw 3 members of the Blood Phoenix MC parked right in front of Anderson's Hardware. One of them, a tall, imposing man they called Scorpion, got off his bike and kicked the front step like he owned the place. Scorpion leaned over the sidewalk display in front of Anderson's Hardware, his boot knocking over a set of garden tools with deliberate carelessness. "Better clean that up, old man," he called out, his voice cutting through the morning like a blade. "Wouldn't want anyone tripping and getting hurt now, would we?" Inside the diner, Frank kept sipping his coffee, seemingly unfazed by the provocation. But Pat saw it, the subtle tightening of his grip, the way his knuckles went bone white around the cup. "They're pushing," Chief Rick Sawyer murmured, eyes on the street. "Testing limits. Seeing who cracks first." "That how you see it, Chief?" Frank's voice was calm, his eyes still on the window. Rick nodded slowly. "And you?" Frank set down his coffee with care. "I see men who confuse cruelty for power. Who think fear equals respect." He stood, slow and steady, placing a few bills on the counter. "Thing is, men like that, they don't stop pushing until they hit something that doesn't move." As he headed for the door, Mary Ellen's voice followed him, tight with worry. "Frank, what are you gonna do?" He paused, hand resting on the handle. "Same thing I do every morning, Mary Ellen. Open my shop. Raise my flag. Remind myself who I am." He glanced back, and for a moment, the years peeled away. Not anger in his eyes, something deeper. Something still and unshakable. "The question is," he added, "when the time comes, will this town remember who it is?" The bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped outside. They watched as Frank crossed the street, walking past the bikers without so much as a glance. He began gathering the scattered tools from his display, slow, deliberate movements that somehow made him look even stronger. "Sometimes," Pat whispered, "I forget who he used to be, before he was just Frank, the guy who sells shovels." Chief Sawyer's face darkened. "At the rate things are going, we all might be reminded real soon." The sun climbed higher, painting Thunder Ridge in gold. The American flag above Anderson's Hardware fluttered in the breeze, casting a long shadow across the street. A line. A warning. A challenge. And on the other side of that line, Jake Marshall sat atop his gleaming Harley-Davidson, mirrored sunglasses reflecting the storefront like a threat waiting to be delivered. Chrome gleamed. Engines rumbled. Behind him, 5 members of the Blood Phoenix MC waited like wolves on a leash. Jake watched Frank through the glass as he helped a customer with paint supplies. The calmness in the old man's posture clearly irritated him. "Guy's got guts," Scorpion muttered, chewing a toothpick. "Everyone else in town's falling in line. But him? He acts like we're invisible." Jake adjusted his leather cut, the Phoenix emblem catching the sun. "Maybe he's brave. Maybe he's just dumb. Either way, I'm done watching." As the customer hurried out, avoiding eye contact with the bikers, Frank followed behind him with a broom in hand, stepping outside to begin sweeping the sidewalk, as if nothing and no one could shake his rhythm. "Time for a little chat," Jake said, killing the engine and swinging off his bike. His boots thudded against the pavement like a drumbeat of trouble. Across the street, Mary Ellen reached for the phone with a trembling hand. Pat gently stopped her. "Don't," she whispered. "Frank knows what he's doing." Jake moved with that casual menace that only comes from someone who enjoys being feared. His men fanned out behind him, surrounding the sidewalk like a slow-moving storm. "Nice morning for a sweep, old-timer," Jake said, voice oily. Frank kept sweeping, eyes on the ground. "Every morning's a good one if you've got the right mindset." Jake let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, that's actually why I came by. Some folks around here, they get it. They understand how things work now. But you..." He kicked a pile of dirt back onto the freshly swept sidewalk. "You seem confused about how things really work." Frank looked down at the mess, then back up, voice calm as ever. "Nature's funny that way. It's always got a surprise for people who think they figured it out. Scorpion stepped forward, fists clenched. You threatening us, old man? No, son, Frank replied, resuming his sweeping. Just handing out free advice. Jake took another step forward, using his size to tower over Frank. Advice ain't worth much around here. You want respect in Thunder Ridge now, you pay for it. He knocked the broom from Frank's hands. It clattered on the concrete, echoing down the street. Frank stared at it for a long moment. Then slowly, his eyes rose to meet Jake's. And for the first time, Jake flinched. Son, Frank said, voice low and steady, you wouldn't know the first thing about respect. Across the street, Tom Mason stood frozen at the door of his auto shop. His fists were balled tight. Next to him, Kate Preston from the town council reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Don't, she whispered. You'll only make it worse. Jake, rattled but unwilling to show it, took a step back, but the tension in the air only grew thicker. Jake's brief hesitation vanished behind a sneer. Maybe it's time we teach you about real respect, he said, his voice edged with menace. Show you what happens to folks who don't get how things work around here. Frank didn't flinch. He simply bent down, picked up his broom, and straightened up with the calm of a man who'd seen far worse. I learned about respect in places you can't even imagine, he said evenly. From men you'll never measure up to. His eyes drifted across the gang, one by one, reading them like old stories he'd already finished. You boys are just playing dress up. Thinking fear makes you strong. I've seen your kind before, in jungles and alleys. They all end the same. Jake's smile dropped. His voice lowered. Oh yeah? And how's that? Frank didn't blink. Forgotten, he said simply. Because bullies don't leave legacies. They leave scars. And scars fade. Scorpion stepped forward, hand twitching toward the inside of his cut, but Jake stopped him with a single raised hand. His grin returned, colder than steel. Bold words, for a man your age, Jake sneered. His gaze drifted to the stars and stripes waving above the store. Would be a shame if something accidentally happened to your precious flag. Or your shop. Frank's expression remained unreadable, but something subtle shifted, a quiet tension in his stance, like a wire pulled tight. The bikers felt it, even if they couldn't name it. A presence. A weight. Something that didn't come from years, but from experience. That flag's seen worse than you, Frank said, voice soft but steady. Came back with me from DAC 47 men died protecting what it stands for. Real men. Warriors. Then his eyes locked on Jake's. You touch that flag, son, and you'll find out real quick the difference between playing war and living it. For a moment, no one said a word. The only sound was the Montana wind snapping the flag above them, sharp and unrelenting. Then Jake forced a laugh, but it rang hollow. Big talk for a relic. He backed off, mounting his bike with a sneer. We'll see how tough you are when the time comes. Because it is coming, old man. Count on that. The Blood Phoenix MC roared away, engine screaming down Main Street, leaving nothing but smoke, tension, and the feeling that something big had just shifted. Frank picked up the broom again, sweeping the sidewalk as if nothing had happened. But those who knew him, really knew him, saw it in his eyes. That something inside had woken up. Something that had been sleeping for years, but was never truly gone. Inside the diner, Pat Gardner finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Lord, Frank, what are you doing? She whispered. Mary Ellen's hands trembled as she poured another cup. They'll be back. We all know they'll be back. Frank re-entered the diner like he had 1,000 times before. Calm. Focused. Of course they'll come back, he said quietly. Men like that always do. Their pride won't let them do anything else. Chief Sawyer stepped through the door, having watched the entire standoff from down the street. Got a call from Cedar Ridge this morning, he said. Blood Phoenix burned down a business last night. Owner refused to pay protection money. Just a matter of time before they try the same thing here. Kate Preston, from the town council, arrived moments later. The council meets tonight, she said. They want to talk about accommodation. Frank's jaw tightened. Accommodation, he repeated. That's a pretty word for surrender. What choice do we have? Tom asked, bitter. They've got the whole town scared. Police can't stop them. Nobody can. Frank didn't answer at first. He stared into his coffee like it held a battlefield instead of a beverage. A memory flickered, Con Tum, 1968. His unit surrounded. Radios crackling. One call changed everything. Sometimes, he said at last, it's not about stopping them. It's about reminding them they're not the only ones who can play rough. He stood, dropping a few bills on the counter. If you'll excuse me, I need to make a call. Rick raised a brow. What kind of call? Frank paused at the door. Just checking in with some old friends. Men who haven't forgotten what it means to stand together. Men who still know what that flag really stands for. As he walked back across the street, the rising sun lit his silver hair like a beacon. His shadow stretched long across the pavement, not the shadow of a shopkeeper, but of a soldier. The flag above Anderson's Hardware snapped in the wind, stars catching the light like sparks from a fire just starting to burn again. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Jake Marshall gathered his crew, pride still burning from the old man's defiance. Tonight, he told them, his voice flat and final, we show Thunder Ridge what happens when people forget their place. We start with that damn flag. What Jake didn't realize was this: the moment he made that decision, he'd set something much bigger in motion. Something older than his gang. Something forged in fire, in blood, in loyalty. Some warriors never really hang up their arms. Some bonds never break. The low rumble of approaching engines grew louder, more distinct. Frank gently returned the old photograph to his desk drawer, then walked toward the front window. Jake Marshall led the Blood Phoenix MC in a slow, deliberate parade down Main Street, but this time, there were more bikes than usual. A lot more. Frank didn't recognize many of the faces. Reinforcements. Other chapters had arrived. Across the street, Mary Ellen was locking up early, hands trembling as she flipped the diner's sign to closed. Pat Gardner was helping her, both women glancing nervously at the growing crowd of bikers gathering in front of Anderson's Hardware. Get home safe, Frank called to them through the open door. And stay inside tonight. Pat hesitated, her voice low. They're coming for it, aren't they? The flag? Frank nodded, eyes still on the street. Been coming since day one. Time they showed their true colors. Mary Ellen's voice cracked. Maybe just this one time, Frank. Let it go. No, he said gently but firmly. Some things you don't give up. Not ever. The women hurried to their cars. Frank watched as the gang multiplied. He counted over 30 riders now. Their engines formed a thunderous chorus that echoed between the storefronts. 2 blocks away, he could see Chief Sawyer's patrol car parked quietly, watching. But without a clear reason to act, the police couldn't intervene. Jake dismounted and gathered his lieutenants. Scorpion passed around dark glass bottles, each with a rag stuffed into its neck. Already soaked in gasoline. Jake's voice rang out, sharp in the evening air. Time to teach Thunder Ridge what respect really means. What happens when you don't fall in line? Frank turned from the window and walked calmly to the back office. He picked up the phone, fingers dialing from memory now, no need for the faded scrap of paper. It rang twice. Then a gravelly voice answered, Murphy. Jack, Frank said quietly. It's Anderson. A pause. Then, Jesus, Frank. Been a long time. How bad? They're about to burn her, Jack. The flag. Our flag. The one that covered Martinez. Rodriguez, all the others. Another pause. Shorter this time. When Colonel Jack Murphy spoke again, his voice had changed. It carried the weight of command. "Where are you?" "Thunder Ridge, Montana." "Anderson's Hardware." "Main Street." "How many?" Frank glanced through the window. 30, maybe more." "Blood Phoenix MC, serious muscle." "Hold position," Murphy ordered, his voice cold steel. "How long can you maintain?" Frank watched Jake Marshall raise a Molotov cocktail in plain view. "No choice, Jack. It's not just about the flag anymore. It's about everything it stands for." 10 hours, Murphy said firmly. "We're already moving." 10 hours, Frank. "Just like Keysan." "Copy that, Colonel." Frank set the phone down just as the first bottle smashed through the window. The fire ignited instantly, licking across the hardwood floor, growing fast. Jake's voice bellowed above the crackling blaze. "Come on out, old man. Come watch your flag burn. We'll light it up just for you." Frank moved through the smoke with the focus of a man who'd faced fire before. He paused only to retrieve the photograph from his desk. Outside, the Blood Phoenix MC had formed a loose semicircle around the burning building, their leather jackets glowing in the firelight, their faces flickering like shadows from a nightmare. But above it all, the flag still flew, catching the light, edges glowing, unburned. "Last chance, old timer," Jake shouted. "Kneel now, or we burn it all." Then Frank stepped out through the haze, his silhouette emerging from the smoke like something carved from the past. His spine was straight. His face was calm. His presence silenced half the gang in an instant. "Son," Frank said, his voice cutting through the roar of the flames, "you just started a war you can't win." Jake tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. "Look around, old man. You're alone. Nobody's coming for you." Frank didn't blink. He just smiled. A quiet, terrifying smile. The kind of smile that says, "You've already lost." "That's where you're wrong, boy," he said evenly. "See, there's something you need to understand about old soldiers." And then, right on cue, another sound rose in the distance. Not the chaos of gang bikes, but a low, rhythmic thunder. Steady. Coordinated. Military. Jake's head snapped toward the noise. He saw lights moving in formation. Trucks. Bikes. Vans. Not locals. And not cops. Emergency vehicles began to arrive, but many of them weren't marked for local use. Military stickers adorned the sides. And the men stepping out, they didn't move like volunteers or police. They moved like warriors. Combat veterans. Real ones. "What the hell is this?" Scorpion stammered, backing toward his bike. Frank's eyes never left Jake. "This?" Frank said, still calm. "This is just the advance team. The real army's still 10 hours out." Jake's expression faltered. Frank took a step closer. "Remember what I said about respect? About the difference between playing war and living it?" More veterans were arriving by the minute. Some still wore camo. Some wore patched leather vests of their own, with symbols that hadn't been seen in decades. But their eyes were all the same. Steady. Unyielding. Jake's bravado was cracking. "You're bluffing," he snapped. "There's no way." One call, Frank cut in. That's all it took. One call to remind my brothers that the flag you just tried to burn, it doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to us all. And there's 200 more just like these men, on their way. The fire department was working the scene now, but the damage had already been done. Smoke still curled from the scorched windows of Anderson's Hardware, but Frank stood unmoved, like a sentinel from another era, a relic not of time, but of principle. His eyes never left Jake Marshall's face. "You've got 10 hours, Frank said, his voice low but firm. 10 hours to decide what kind of men you really are. Because when Colonel Murphy gets here with the main force, there won't be any decisions left to make." Jake took a step back. His swagger faded, eaten away by something he couldn't name, the unnerving calm of a man who had already survived hell once and wasn't afraid to walk through it again. "Mount up," Jake barked at his men, struggling to keep authority in his voice. "This isn't over, old man." "No," Frank replied, his eyes like steel, "it's just beginning." The Blood Phoenix MC roared off into the night, engines screaming like a warning they themselves no longer believed. As the smoke thinned, Chief Sawyer approached, taking in the scene, the partially burned storefront, the makeshift perimeter forming around it, and the American flag still flying high, untouched by flame. He nodded toward the figures now moving with practiced efficiency around the building. "Those men," he said quietly, "they showed up fast." "I've been waiting a long time for that call, Rick," Frank answered. "Some debts don't expire. And some bonds, they never break." In the distance, more engines rumbled, not the reckless roar of gang bikes, but the steady thunder of reinforcements. Veterans, answering a call they'd never forgotten. Across the street, Mary Ellen and Pat watched from the shadows of the diner, eyes wide as more riders poured into town. Above it all, the flag moved gently in the night breeze, untouched, unyielding, a symbol not of fabric, but of fire-tested conviction. Frank glanced down at the photograph still in his hand, young faces in jungle fatigues, tired but defiant, standing beneath the very same flag. Some of them had never come home. 10 hours, he whispered. Just like Kisan. Hold the line. Reinforcements are coming. The night was far from over. But Thunder Ridge was about to learn the difference between intimidation and unshakable resolve. Between fear and honor. And what real strength looked like, not the kind built on dominance, but on duty, sacrifice, and unity that transcended time. Meanwhile, across town, tension thickened inside the Blood Phoenix compound. The clubhouse was alive with nervous energy. Jake Marshall paced the warped floorboards, watching through cracked windows as his men scrambled to fortify their perimeter. But something had changed. The usual arrogance was gone, replaced by unease. The flag burning was supposed to break him, Jake muttered. But it woke something instead. Scorpion burst through the door, breath tight. 43 more bikes just rolled into town. Veterans. Organized. Riding like a military unit. Jake hurled a bottle against the wall. It shattered, but the sound didn't calm him. How? How does one old man make one call and bring this many that fast? From the corner, Lightning, the gang's enforcer, looked up from his phone. You don't get it, boss, he said. That old man. I've been digging. Frank Anderson's not just a veteran. He's the veteran. Jake spun toward him. What does that mean? Lightning didn't flinch. 3 silver stars. 2 purple hearts. Led one of the most elite rescue teams in Nam. They called him the Ghost of Denam. He specialized in extracting entire units from behind enemy lines. Survived missions nobody else would even attempt. Bandit, usually silent, finally spoke. My dad served in Nam. Used to talk about a pilot who flew through hell to pull out a whole platoon. Said he never saw anything like it. Lightning nodded grimly. That's not the worst part. The man he called tonight, Colonel Jack Murphy? They call him Battle Jack. He runs the largest veteran biker network in 3 states. These aren't just old soldiers. They're organized, connected, and loyal. Jake's face darkened as the truth sank in. They'd built their empire on fear, on the belief that no one would ever push back. But now, something bigger had been set in motion. Back at the hardware store, Frank stood calmly outside the partially burned building, directing arriving veterans with the same quiet authority he'd once used under fire. The store had transformed into a tactical hub, commercial order replaced by military precision. Pat Gardner returned from Mary Ellen's diner with a tray of coffee and sandwiches. Frank, she said softly, you've been on your feet for hours. At least take a minute to eat something. He accepted the coffee, but waved off the rest. Too many mistakes get made when your stomach's full but your eyes aren't sharp. 5 motorcycles rolled up to the perimeter, their riders wearing Brotherhood patches, worn with pride. The lead man, weathered and upright, dismounted with formal military bearing. "Master Sergeant James Cooper," he said. "Colonel Murphy sent us ahead. Advanced recon." Frank gave a respectful nod. "Glad you're here, Sergeant. Town's about 4 miles square. Blood Phoenix holds the north end, compounds behind the old lumber mill." Cooper pulled out a map. Veterans gathered around instinctively. Plans were laid. Perimeter zones assigned. Comms tested. Decades of training clicked into place like they'd never left the field. Chief Sawyer watched from his cruiser, jaw slack with disbelief as Thunder Ridge shifted before his eyes, from a small, frightened town into a forward operating base. More veterans arrived by the hour. They didn't hesitate. They didn't question. They simply found their place because they knew the mission. And they trusted the man who called them in. Inside the diner, Mary Ellen whispered to Pat, "It's like watching the town come back to life." Pat nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the flag still waving in the wind. "It's more than that," she said. "It's like watching history stand its ground." Mary Ellen moved between tables with practiced ease, refilling mugs and offering quiet comfort to a room full of locals and newly arrived veterans. The air in the diner had shifted. What was once thick with anxiety now carried a cautious but growing sense of hope. Stories began to emerge, like slow-burning embers catching fire. "I was there," an older veteran began, his voice gravelly with age but steady. The room hushed as he spoke. "Key San, 68. We were cut off, no way out, pinned down for days. Most of us thought that was the end." He paused, his gaze distant. Then out of nowhere, this chopper appears, flying through enemy fire so thick you could walk on it. Frank Anderson was at the stick. Pulled 20 of us out. Never asked for thanks. Just looked at us and said, "This is what brothers do." The story struck a chord. Others followed. Tales of a quiet man who once ran a small-town hardware store but had lived a life most could hardly imagine. Men who knew him from jungle operations, black ops missions, last-minute rescues. Missions no one talked about, but no one forgot. Each story painted a picture of a man whose service had never really ended. Then Tom Mason burst into the diner, breathless with urgency. "You've got to see this," he exclaimed. "The highway's full, at least 50 more bikes heading into town." Outside, Frank stood shoulder to shoulder with Sergeant Cooper, eyes on the town map. "Jake won't wait," Frank said. "His pride won't allow it. He'll make a move before the main force arrives." "Let him," Cooper replied, voice hard with quiet certainty. "We've got 3 decades of combat experience covering every route in and out. If they want to pretend they're soldiers, let's show them what real ones look like." Just then, a young veteran jogged up, his expression tense. "Sir, movement at the compound. Looks like they're breaking into small units. Heading out in different directions." Frank's eyes narrowed. "They're probing us, testing reaction time, searching for weaknesses." He turned to Cooper with a faint smile. "Remember Hill 149? Cooper grinned. "Like it was yesterday. Same tactics. Same playbook. Different fools." He began barking orders, and the veterans moved with seamless precision, like a machine long stored but perfectly maintained. Across town, at the Blood Phoenix compound, Jake Marshall watched his scouts ride out with uneasy anticipation, his grip on control already beginning to slip. "Find their soft spots," Jake growled. "They're just old men with war stories." But Scorpion shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should pull back, call in reinforcements." Jake slammed his fist down. "We are the reinforcements." Still, his words didn't land like they used to. Out the window, more veterans arrived, rolling in with steady, disciplined formation. These weren't bikers trying to look hard. These were warriors, real ones, men who'd faced fire, blood, and loss, and had come out stronger. Back at Anderson's hardware, Frank stood alone in the office for a moment, eyes on the old photograph of his unit. He touched the faces of the brothers who'd fought beside him, many of whom hadn't made it home. The phone rang, and Frank answered. It was Murphy. How's it look? Like old times, Frank replied, gaze never leaving the horizon. They're testing us, same as the VC did back in Kisan. You told me once, Murphy said, there's a difference between soldiers and warriors. Frank allowed himself a brief smile. Soldiers fight because they're ordered to. Warriors fight because they understand why it matters. We're 3 hours out, Murphy said. 200 strong. Frank looked out the window again, watching veterans securing corners, watching rooftops, watching everything. We'll hold, he said. They're about to learn the difference between intimidation and strength. Murphy's tone turned serious. You think they'll stand down? Frank thought of Jake's face during the flag burning, rage mixed with uncertainty. Some will, he said quietly. The smart ones. The rest? They'll learn the hard way. There are some lines you don't cross. Some flags you don't burn. Outside, the wind caught the tattered edge of the American flag that still flew above Anderson's hardware, its stripes darkened by soot but still defiant in the breeze. The night wasn't over. The real storm hadn't even begun.